Okay, we're going to do a quick announcement here.
Buenas noches, padres. Si ocupan intérprete, estoy en la mesa ya. Vienen y agarran un para intérprete. Gracias.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, good evening. Welcome to the 6th meeting of the Middle School Boundary Advisory Committee. I want to announce that all of our middle school boundary adjustment meetings are being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel. We're posting links for that on the board adjustment webpage and on the district's Facebook and Twitter feeds. I understand that the audio of the last meeting was, non-existent and terrible. We have, believe me, I heard from a lot of people. We have, I think, fixed it. So we spent the past, week trying to troubleshoot it. So hopefully we're all good. If not, please let me know again if it's not working, and we will continue to work on that. The advisory committee meetings are all public meetings, and all materials will be available to the public through the posting of those materials on the district's webpage. As you know, my name is Stephen Sparks. I'm the administrator for long-range planning for the Beaverton School District, and I'll be facilitating the meetings here throughout our boundary process. For those of you who have been here before, we have meeting expectations, and these expectations apply to everybody in the room. So, going through our list, the expectations for the meeting are: we assume the best intentions. We all want the best for all of our students. We listen intently to understand better. We are open to considering new ideas. We remain open to influence and are not judgmental. We will consider all options. There are no bad questions. Our interactions will be done with respect, and we will respect opposing viewpoints. So I just want to repeat a concept that we've talked about here before. Our committee is appointed from across the district, representation from many different areas and schools. The committee's questions, comments, suggestions, and ultimately their recommendation will be for the benefit of all students in the district. So, as I said last time at our meeting in terms of public testimony, I want to be sure we revisit how we're going to do that. We will be drawing names randomly across elementary school district attendance boundaries. If your name is called, you are the one who will be presenting testimony. You're not yielding your time to somebody else. So if I call Steve Sparks, I don't expect to see Robert McCracken walk up. If you as an audience want to have a single representative speak, then we expect a single yellow card from that attendance area. And absent that, each person who wants to speak will have an equal opportunity to have their name called. So also, just as a reminder, you've seen these before as our board objectives for the boundary. Quickly, they are a new boundary for Timberland, reduce the number of students to approximately 90% of permanent capacity at Stoller, balance the enrollments at the other schools, and if needed, we can do minor amendments to other attendance boundaries. So we had a pretty lengthy discussion last week. We had 6 test maps at that time, and congratulations, we are now up to 8. So with test maps, what we're going to do is you're going to see that these are really kind of variations of the maps that we talked about last week. There's a couple new ones, but there are nothing radically different that you haven't seen before. But before I walk through the test maps, what I want to do is a couple of things. First, outcomes for tonight's meeting. Starting at our next meeting on January 30th, we're going to be entering the 3rd phase of the project, where we're going to be working on working maps, not test maps. So what we're going to be doing is, at the end here, I hope that we're winnowing our map choices down, and that for working maps, we have no more than 3 working maps. Because at that time, we're going to start running those maps through the filter of all of our factors in Policy JC. So that includes transportation, socioeconomic diversity, proximity, all the different factors that are contained in Policy JC. So at the end of the committee's discussion here this evening, I'll be asking the committee members to identify 2 maps of what you see behind me that they would like to see move forward to January 30th. So before I go to those maps, I think it was Charisse at the last meeting talked about, well, what do the principals think? And so I'm going to invite Ken Struckmeyer to speak on that, because we have been talking quite a bit about what makes a middle school, and this also will address Monica's comment about dual language.
Good evening. I'm Ken Struckmeyer. I'm the Executive Administrator for Middle Schools. The criteria clearly comes from the board, but as middle school educators, we want to ensure that every child in the district is at a school that is one that prepares that child for life after high school. And in order for that to happen, there are some considerations that middle school principals would like to advance to you. The question was, what are we thinking? We're thinking that middle schools are best when there's a focus on equity. And for us, that is that we would aspire that students are navigating the kind of diversity that is in our community, and they're doing that at a young age with the support of adults that help them to be open-minded and to understand that there are people of different economic levels and people from different racial backgrounds. So that would be a lens, a positive map would take that into consideration and ensure that our kids have diverse schools. We think it's really important to focus on the feed to high school, that our teachers aspire to increase the level of rigor. And in order to do that, we're taking on during middle school, our students are taking on high school work. We're accelerating their learning. When high schools have disparate programs, that means middle school teachers have to align themselves with multiple high schools. That's a challenge. So we'd like to see as few splits to high school from middle school as possible. We also believe that SUMA is a program, and that program works best when SUMA students are learning in community with other students that are not in SUMA. So we'd like to see at least 3 or 4 sites for SUMA, and we think the sweet spot for the number of students would be about 90 kids per grade level, and the reason for that would be that we could have multiple mathematic levels with enough kids to be able to ensure that we're using our resources well. We believe that middle schools need to have about 800 students given 9 campuses for us to be able to offer the full middle school experience that we're working hard to align, and that if we start to see numbers that are considerably lower than that we're worried that we would be hard-pressed to offer the full complement of, for example, choir, band, drama, and so there would be pressure to eliminate electives, and from an equity perspective, that's troubling. And again, you already took on the idea of dual language the last couple meetings. We would love to see some solutions that are thoughtful about not splitting the elementary campuses where students are in dual language programs. If that is necessary, there are other ways to work around that. But a clean feed so that every child that was taking part in an elementary dual language program matriculated to a middle school, that would be ideal because it would not require families to have to navigate cumbersome things to get their kids to the right school to be able to continue their learning in a dual language. environment. Well, thank you.
So before I completely walk away from Ken, do you have any questions concerning what you just heard from principals? Go ahead, John, please speak into the microphone.
Hi, Ken. Thank you very much for those insights. Those are very helpful. I had two questions about split feeders that you referenced. One is you didn't allude to anything about elementary to middle school. Could you just talk a bit about your opinion on that? And then the second one is if I look at all of the maps, all of them have several split feeders at high school. So I'd be interested in your opinion on, is there a difference if they're balanced split, so about 50-50, or is it good to have a predominant school feeder?
Great question. Many of our middle school principals are navigating having elementaries that split between two middle schools. There's a couple variables at play. We have variable size of elementary. So for example, we may have a large elementary where hundreds of kids go to a neighborhood middle school and a small neighborhood school. And so sometimes the number of students coming, whether or not it's a split, that creates a dynamic in grade 6 that we're really concerned about to make sure that kids feel welcome, that it helps to have some familiar faces and a sense that they are part of the community walking in. So this is a little in and out. I hope that I can keep it stable. So if we had a preference, we would love to see clean elementary and clean high schools. Based on the number of schools we have, that would be a challenge. So being thoughtful about the balance of splits, so there's a critical mass of students, would enable middle schools to do a better job of supporting kids in grade 6.
Just to go back to the dual language, and if the committee were to settle on maps that did split those schools, what kind of, like we're given the option to discuss legacy, what other ideas potentially did the leadership discuss that we could factor into our decisions?
Right, so there's a way to perhaps have clean feeds that eliminate other solutions. But if we were given a solution that, for example, students at Vos or Barnes, that half were going to a school with dual language and half were not, we would have to look at how does our approach to providing dual language in middle school and high school need to move to more of an option school-like approach that families would opt in, and once they opted in, that they would be in and not have to do an annual transfer process or something. And we want to be really thoughtful that the moment we start having application for those, we're going to lose some families and some kids because usually they have deadlines, forms need to be done. The cleanest way to have supportive programs is to have the feeders.
All right, thank you. So with that, we have these 8 maps up here, and I'm going to scan through them real quick. But for tonight, in terms of the committee, one of the things that I talked about, I think it was in December, was for you to grab the mic and go up to the board and draw on it and things like that. Well, you didn't do that last time, and I think that would have been helpful. So, for the benefit of everybody in the room, I'm just going to walk through very quickly and do a very, very high-level view of what these maps are. And then I'm going to ask different committee members to go up and talk about those maps. If you get long-winded, I will cut you off. We're not going to spend half an hour on a map. Also, because of our audio problems, I would ask and remind each of you that turn on your microphone, lean into it, put that thing right on your chin, and speak clearly, don't mumble. And if you want to go to the map, please, I'll use the handheld mic and we'll get everything recorded. So, to move through fairly quickly here, This is test map 3. This map was shown at the last meeting. What's different about this map is that we tweaked some of the SUMA assignments, and those numbers are reflective of that. Test map 5 is a variation on test map 4 that you saw last week, as is test map 6. It's also a variation of test map 4. Test map 7 and test map 8 here, these are variations of the staff capacity map that we provided last week, and there are a few tweaks between these two that I'll ask our committee member to talk about. Test map 9, this was the map that was requested from Yasmin in terms of a member of the public who submitted this and requesting our review of that. Test map 10 is also a variation of the staff capacity map. And then test map 11 is yet again another variation of trying to merge the capacity and the feeder map that we saw last week. So I'm going to go back to test map 3, and I'm going to invite Divya if you would like to talk about test map 3 and test map 10, and if you want to point and mark on the boards, please come up and I'll give you the microphone. Otherwise, you can sit and do it. Okay, perfect.
Should I be pointing here or over there on the board? I think I'll go over there, that's fine. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so test map 3 and test map 10. There are a few things that are common among the two. The first one is addressing walkability for the Findlay kids who are in this area. They are in walking distance. The problem though with map 3 is if I take entire of Findlay and feed it into Stoller, it's going to put it above 90% in 21 and above 100% in 25. So to resolve that, okay. So to resolve that, the thought is to move the SUMA kids who are here in the non-walking zone of Findlay to go to Timberland, but the kids who are here in Findlay walking distance attend the SUMA program here in Stoller, like any other Sato and Jacob Wismar kids are. So this map contains SUMA programs in 2 locations, Stoller and Timberland. The reason why I chose to go with Sato, and I understand Springville also is proximity for Stoller, is because this area that is here in the northeast of Sato hasn't started growing. But in the AC report, we got a link to the North Bethany master plan. In that link, we are realizing that 2025, at least I am realizing that by 2025, the growth in Sato is not done. So any decline in population coming from Jacob Wismar and Findlay walking area will be supported by the Sato growth. If I put Springville also into the solar boundary, the growth in Springville and Sato together is not enough to address the decline that we are seeing from the Jacob Wismar and Findlay somewhat built out areas. Hence the proposal to take Sato, Jacob Wismar and Findlay into Stoller, but the Findlay SUMA kids go to Timberland that are not in the walking zone. That puts solar at 90% in 21. I think it is at 98% in 25. But however, I told that the growth in North Bethany going beyond 25 will be enough to put solar at 100.
Okay, so Divya, I'm going to ask you, we're going to move to 10 here really quick while you're standing up, and you can talk about this one.
Yes, so map 10 is identical to 3, where it takes the Findlay kids here who are in the walking zone to Stoller. It also addresses the Springville here on the north side, because they seem to be farther from Five Oaks. But other than that, SUMA is still at Stoller, also a SUMA at Timberland. Again, we also have to realize that the SUMA program here in this North Bethany, entire current solar boundary is 365. So I think offering SUMA in 2 locations is something I would support and recommend BST to do. And at this point, I want to ask the committee a question, which is walkability. These are the only 2 maps that takes the walking kids from Findlay. I know we wanted to have a philosophical discussion about walkability. So if we are going to not choose these 2 maps, we are going to lose those walking kids from Findlay. And also Jacob Ismer, some of it.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to, we're going to move on to committee discussion here. So at this point, you heard on Divya on map 3 and 10. I'd like to have some conversation about that. And as usual, we'll do the cards, but I will also be calling on people as well. So, John.
Hi, Stephen. This is maybe a question for you in response to Divya's question to us, and that is if we lose the walkability option. So if I understood the process, if we were to select a different map, for example, say 9 and 11, and we then later chose that we should split Findlay to create some walkability zones, we could do that.
Yes, you can. So as we go forward in the working maps, if there are whole elementary school feeders, irrespective of walking zones, when we go through that analysis of transportation costs, proximity, and the like, you will have that data where you as a committee can say, boy, I am not so sure I would like for us to revise this working map to include X, whatever it might be. So it is not a yes-no type of decision. Charisse.
I like what you said, Divya, around 10 and 3, I get it. And I agree with you. I think 10 is probably the better place to start, mainly because of the middle school to high school feeder patterns that are on 10 versus the ones that are on test free, even with the changes. So I'd like to start there myself.
Okay.
Michelle.
I totally agree with Charisse, and I think if at this point we can eliminate a map, like right away, I would get rid of 3.
Okay. Well, that's certainly a comment to consider for the committee.
And that's mostly because of the feeder, particularly Meadow Park going to 4 high schools.
Okay. So Divya, in response.
Can you hear me now? Okay. The concern I have with map 10 is, yes, I understand the feeder pattern, but again, please consider the North Bethany master plan and also the infrastructure coming along with it, with some connections to 185th. There is a resolution for map 3 to solve the feeder pattern. Is this a good time, Steve, to offer those refinements for the committee to consider on map 3? Steve?
I'm sorry, I was scrolling through to map 3. I didn't hear your question.
The question is now a good time to offer refinements to map 3 to address the feeder issue?
If you have a suggestion to make, please make it.
Okay, so the refinements that I like to offer is move Beaver Acres from Meadow Park to Mountain View. This should resolve the Meadow Park going to 4 high schools to 3 high schools, which is similar to the other test maps. And the second is move Oak Hills to Meadow Park from Timberland. This should also resolve the overcrowding in Timberland. So these are the 2 refinements that I like to offer. And this should resolve the splitter for Meadow Park from 4 high schools to 3 high schools.
Okay. Still here on 3 and 10. Looking at you, Matt.
Yeah, I just had one comment. We do talk about walkability, which is super important. I think, I'm leaning towards map 10, but one thing I think that we do need to talk about, and I think we'll get there when we start plugging in and we narrow down the maps, is the diversity angle. When I look at map 3, I feel like we're missing something.
Jason.
So some notes I'd made on map 3. I think there's some clear distance problems when you evaluate that criteria. Looking at the commute Springville's facing, looking at Aloha Huber Park being pulled, all the way across the width of the district. Also looking at Oak Hills now having a fairly long commute. I also kind of evaluate, I kind of mentioned last week, I'm looking at the net effect on the various schools. I mean, my belief is that we're stuck with a large impact at the Stoller community. That's the nature of why we're here. But I'm seeing an extremely large turnover at both the existing Cedar Park community and the Five Oaks community. It's quite a lot of disruption that's not necessary when we look at some other things. And the other thing I've got to say is I'm going to throw out the term community splits. And we've heard, for instance, a way to demonstrate that, Raleigh Park. We've heard from several people from Raleigh Park talking about what they considered their natural community, affiliations with sports teams, other kids in their area that aren't strictly part of their school that they've gotten to know that help with the entrance to middle school, quickly making friends that you may be familiar with. And this is going to introduce some splits over there in the Raleigh Park area. Also, the general, what I'll call the Cedar Mill area, and I don't mean Cedar Mill Elementary, I'll talk about that more later in another map. And also just looking at Bethany, sticking out there, Bethany Elementary like a sore thumb, with different schools on either side of it. Map 10. So again, we've got large disruptions beyond Timberland at Five Oaks, Cedar Park, and also Meadow Park in this case. So, and when I say large, I mean I believe it's 50% or more of the student existing community is turning over. We've got some real walkability and consistency. I noticed you mentioned that that was a factor behind this map, but you look at the split that's been introduced at Sato, sending it down to Meadow Park, that's a highly walkable zone according to the map we saw. Similarly, the split of Chehalem, that's pulled north to Cedar Park. It is in a walkable zone to Highland Park. So there's some inconsistency in relation to walkability. It introduces 3 new splits, and this is one that I carved out that really jumped out at me, 10 and 11. It takes the existing Stoller community and it splits it into 4 parts. That to me it just jumps out. That seems unnecessary. There's 5 schools now. We shouldn't be breaking it up into 4 pieces.
So, thank you, Jason. Divya, before we call you for rebuttal, I'm looking towards Christy or Michael. Any comments?
I'm not a huge fan of map 3, again, because of the splits from middle school to high school, especially for Meadow Park. And then the Lower Huber Park to Cedar Park, compared to some of the other maps that I think I like better, one thing that I've started looking at is, so we've been talking about what percentage we're going to focus on for a target percentage for some of the schools. And some schools do not have portable capacity. So Five Oaks, Timberland, and Whitford do not have portable capacity. So any map that shows overcapacity at those schools is not really going to be realistic, in my opinion. The other thing to look at is there are some schools that are smaller, and there was a mention of needing a minimum of 800 students at a middle school. Some of the middle schools are already less than 900 students. So we need to target some of these middle schools, and that's a general comment along all the maps.
Okay, so Divya, I'll give you the last comment on these maps, but before I do, anybody else? And then we're going to move to the next group of maps. Anybody else? Okay, Divya.
Yep, closing thoughts. Between 3 and 10, I agree with most of the comments committee made. However, on 10, notice that Barnes Elementary goes to Cedar Park, which does not support the dual language program. I also don't like the fact that I'm losing Sato walking kids on map 10. So if I were to pick between 3 and 10, I would do 3 with the refinements I offered, which is moving Meadow Park, I'm looking into my notes. Yeah, Beaver Acres from Meadow Park to Mountain View, and Oak Hills from Timberland to Meadow Park. That should resolve the feeder pattern.
Okay, thank you. All right, so going next in order, we're going to map 5 and 6. So Jason, do you want to stand up and do it? Okay.
Hi there. Let me grab a Sharpie because I want to actually talk about, and I won't draw on the projection board, I promise.
Jason, because 5 is so, our plotter for whatever reason didn't work, can you use the laser pointer at the screen?
Yes, I will do that. I'm going to make a note here, then I'll move over there.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn this on the fly into map 5A. And the reason is, we can pitch some numbers and we see how they come back. And I'm going to do 2 things to make this slightly different. The one is, if you look at the numbers you see, by the way, the starting point for this is, as Steve said, it's a variation on map 4, where I say I start with my 5.5 cards that is the Stoller population. I'm going to deal 3 of them to Stoller. In this case, Stoller landed with Jacob Wismer, Sato, and Rock Creek. Springville and Findlay here, the SUMA program down to Timberland. A nice thing I'm going to point out here, I mentioned with the previous map we were talking about split Stoller 4 ways. This is one of 2 maps that splits Stoller just 2 ways. The thing I want to change, because we have capacity, the way the numbers fall out, we have more capacity at Timberland. I think we're maybe 50 under the target of 800. That's the largest school, it's the safest school, let's bring in more capacity. When I'm thinking about bringing in the populations into Timberland out of the Cedar Park area, the first thing I want to do is bring in Cedar Mill, since it encompasses the Timberland boundary. So this one is going to go to Timberland on 5A. And then to address the issue with Whitford capacity, it's narrowly over capacity because I brought this split of Raleigh Park in. We will return this back to Cedar Park. And then I want to kind of park it there on 5A. And you have the laser pointer at this point? And I'll just make one point, because I think this to me now is a measuring stick. Okay, we have met all of the objectives. We have sufficiently depopulated Stoller. We've happened to do so by only splitting it, in half roughly. We have to live with the fact that we've learned every move we make out of Stoller will be unpopular with the community. In almost all cases, 3 of the 4 factors in policy JCE seem violated as we do so, but we're stuck with it. Capacity overrides it here. But the one other change against the existing map today, we bring in Cedar Mill, that's a desired change. We've heard from the Met community. We enable several factors to policy JC here. And I'm not opposed to making other changes in the South. There's other ideas. We can potentially evolve this map later, but I'm going to suggest this is the measuring stick, in that we've moved 3 elementary schools and 1 options program, and we've met our objectives.
Okay, Jason, I'm going to ask you to go to wrap this one up and move to your next one.
And so the only thing I'm going to say is, if we're going to pursue other maps, if we're going to evolve this, every change we make, or I'm going to say at least 80% of it, should be like this one from Cedar Mill Timberland, viewed as positive by the community. Otherwise, why are we doing it when we can solve it this simply? Okay, on to map 6. So this is another reshuffle, where this time Springville, Sato, Jacob Wismer remain here, and so we need to move Rock Creek down into 5 Oaks. 5 Oaks is over capacity in 2021, so we need to make a compensatory move As it turns out, you look at the southern end of Five Oaks today, and we've got a Lower Huber Park that's awfully close to Mountain View anyway. This feels like a good move in terms of thinking about proximity, about neighborhood, those factors. So that comes down, and that's a large school, so we need to make two other moves. Or I made two other moves, I should say. There were splits here in Cooper Mountain and Chehalem, where these were over in Mountain View. I've put them back into, or put them into Highland Park, so we no longer have elementary school splits, which is a positive. And the problem there, as you look at the numbers, is Highland Park is, I think, 114 for 2021. It's a very high percentage of permanent capacity. That led into the email question we saw today to Steve. He said, but if you note, it's actually, I believe, narrowly under or right at capacity if you include portables. And Highland Park is one that's going to drop significantly, and it's going to be now under permanent capacity by 2025. So I'll cap that discussion for later. I hope we touch on it. The other thing I want to mention, though, is so should we move ahead with that? What I think we need to do is decide what to do here. Do we kind of give up on the idea of resolving one of those splits to keep the numbers down? Do we wait for 2025 to play out? Do we sequence those changes? The bigger thing that I think we need to wrestle with here is I brought in capacity to fill out Timberland. It's Findlay, the options program, Cedar Mill, and then I moved Rachel Carson. Initially that looks fine in 2021. By 2025, Five Oaks has the biggest drop in enrollment. It's now, if I remember right, down to 60%.
Right.
So it seems to me we need to return Rachel Carson back over to Five Oaks, and then I think we would have a discussion about which of the other elementary schools up here that currently feed into Cedar Park would we bring in to Timberland to pair it with Cedar Mill and with Findlay.
Okay. So thank you for that, Jason. Moving on now, we're going to have committee start asking some questions or discussion about maps 5 and 6. So I am looking at Divya, but I'm looking at you too, Yasmin, Marnie, and Ratika. Want to call on you in a duel, so you're going to have to belly up to the microphone. So Divya, you go first.
Okay, so on map 5 and 6, I understand the SUMA program is Timberland only, right? Yeah. So the question is more for Steve, which is how does the transportation work for the kids who are not in the home, in the boundary for that school? In other words, what happens to that Springville child who is all the way up there northwest? Will he have to travel 5.6 miles to Timberland to attend SUMA program?
So if the nearest SUMA program or the nearest SUMA program with capacity is Timberland, then yes, there would be a bus to that. For these transportation questions that we get too much deeper than that, I'm going to ask on our administrator for transportation to respond. But for this question that you just asked, yes, they would be bused.
So they will go to, so for example, Springville will go to Timberland SUMA or Springville will go to Meadow Park SUMA?
It would probably be the Timberland just because of it's closer than Meadow Park.
I see, okay. So just to put in perspective, that is 100 SUMA kids from Jacobisma, 100 walking kids from Findlay, about 20% of Stoller capacity, average SUMA rates, 20% of Sato capacity. That's a total roughly about 300 kids we are mobilizing by moving Stoller out of the homeschool and putting in Timberland. Either putting them on bus or making them travel farther.
Yeah, about 300-ish students. Okay, Ratika.
My problems with the test map 5 are problems of proximity. I think that should be our biggest focus when I'm looking. I think I brought this up last meeting also because I don't think, busing Springville across the Stoller boundary to go to Timberland just really confuses me. It just doesn't make sense to me to have two areas of a middle school. And you talked about community splits. I think that's the Springville and Finley community are very different, and putting them together, I think, highlights exactly what you said about the community split and how we don't want that. And then moving Cedar Mill, when you were up talking about map 5A, you said that you wanted to move Cedar Mill to Timberland, just Cedar Mill? Yeah, so again, for me, that's really weird to look at because we have three like little boxes of yellow just spread out across the map going to Timberland, and that for me is not ideal because you're splitting up so many different communities and bringing in I agree it's a good like point of diversity, but it just seems a little extreme because I think there's a lot of other things that we can do to fix that problem instead of splitting up communities. Also, when I'm looking at the percentage of like the percent capacity, it looks like that the schools that don't have the capacity to, or don't have portables, are the ones that are actually like hitting max capacity or above. Like Five Oaks has no portables and they're at 106%, and Whitford has no portables and is at 108%, whereas some other schools are much lower. They're like 90 or below, and I just don't think that's fair. I think I see that same problem in committee in the test map 6. But the school that's suffering the most is Highland Park because they're 102% above capacity, but every other school is like 80, 78, 88, 91, 70, 84, 98, which I think creates a problem of equity.
Okay, thank you. Abdul.
Yeah, so let me start with like a general comment. So I think at the end of the last meeting, we actually decided to vote on some of these maps. And I think it was almost a consensus in the committee that we were not going to have a map that looked like map test 3 or 10 or 5 or 6. So I'm kind of bewildered that we have these maps still up here. And I think for majority of the committee members, we all said we wanted to start discussing from the feeder map. We felt that was a good starting point. So I was wondering why we were taking a step back.
So we decided, based on the discussion that was had at the last meeting, to allow and provide more time to look at a range of options. Because the majority of the comments that came in were variations of the capacity and the feeder pattern, we included those, and just out of fairness, for the other ones that came in, we said we'd include those too.
All right, so I think I have just one comment about test map 5 and 6. I kind of understand the spirit behind it. It's like we're trying to get objectives 1 and 2 sorted out, but I mean, you would agree that for these maps, you don't have like contiguous boundaries for the middle schools. And I think that would be a big problem because you're essentially having students that would potentially be friends of each other for about 3 years, live like miles apart from each other. So I don't think that's going to work out well. I think it's a good map theoretically, but in terms of the practical implementation of maps 5 and 6, I think they're flawed in that.
John.
Thank you, Stephen. I just wanted to say I think most of what Ritika said is what I was going to say, so I won't re-comment on most of that. I did want to just ask, similar point of view, I think it would be illogical to me to have people driving past middle schools to get to another middle school. So why did, but I do appreciate, Jason, the idea of challenging and pushing our thinking. So just why did we not take Wismar instead of Springville into Timber? I mean, what were some of the thinking points on moving just Springville in creating these donut pockets.
So you were here for the last meeting, but what I showed as map 4 of last meeting was Springville and Jacob Wismer, the two schools in Stoller closest to Timberland, and moving those. I don't think there was any support for that map, just judging from the reaction of the committee. So again, I shuffled it around. I heard there's a lot of interest in supporting walkability. Obviously, it's a sacrifice there for Findlay, but there's a lot of walkability at Stoller. I'm sorry. Yes, at Stoller, but to be more specific, Sato and Jacob Wismer. So it was prioritizing that, which left Springville as the odd person out. It is absolutely correct that you are ending up with a non-contiguous neighborhood. So in that sense of community, it is a split. In the sense of, again, we've got Stoller as a community, having it in two parts. I mean, that looks to me much better than splitting it 4 different ways, as some of these maps have shown. The one thing, Ricky, I wanted to point out, you mentioned Cedar Mill being on its own. The step that needs to be done next on map 6, if we went that route, would be to pair another elementary school that's right near Cedar Mill in it, so it would no longer be on its own. That was the change I was making for next time, if we continue to evolve that map.
Okay. Thank you. Monica.
Very quickly to agree with some of the comments about having populations split and with different middle schools in the middle. I think that this is actually driving more separation between the student bodies, and that's something that troubles me, especially with the Springville and Findlay, because there is a diversity factor on one side and not on the other. So that kind of puts a east-west first mentality with the students, and these are students that are not only making friends, but they're also having middle school projects, and they have to get together and work on things, and I just don't like the divisiveness of putting them in different places and having something in the middle.
Matt.
I just wanted to add on top of the comments about splitting the neighborhoods and having those gaps in there. These maps also leave a brand new school as the least populated of the whole set.
Okay. Michael, are you reaching for the nameplate? Okay. Abhijit or Parisian, anything you wanted to add to this discussion? Okay. Yasmin, anything? Marnie? Okay. So, Matt.
Sorry, there was a third comment, which was both of these maps also result in 3 different high schools for those people.
All right. Jennifer, Charisse? Okay. So, Jason, do you have any kind of final thought here before we move to the next maps?
Sure. Just addressing Divya's point about transporting the SUMA students. Of course. I mean, that's an acknowledged downside to this. But again, I think one reason why there's a lot of interest amongst the committee in doing that is it is an options program. Look at where ISB is located. Look at where base is located. People are bused all across the district. It's been an unusually privileged position that the SUMA students have had at Stoller, unfortunately due to the overcapacity, in addition to moving the standard population, it's like they're going to have to move the SUMA population. It's not, no one wants to do it, but it's the task at hand. I mean, the other thing I'll mention, folks, is there's all sorts of reasons to say no to something, but the reality is, as I said, you're going to deal the cards. Only 3 schools can stay, and I mean, if you look at I've given you between last time and this time 3 different options, and everyone has said it just doesn't work for anybody. Okay, so someone's got to go, and it's not going to look good. That again, that is a direct consequence of the population being here in the top northwest, and the school that was built to relieve that being all the way over here in the middle right.
Okay, so Divya, you got a final comment here? Because we're going to move on.
Yep, just responding. So the demographic of this northern part of the district, it so happens that SUMA program is so popular, right? There's at least 25% of overall population attending SUMA program. And I want to put in perspective, that's 300 odd kids that we are transporting. And distance from Springville, northwest corner to Timberland is 5.6 miles, above the median. And I wanted to ask Steve, should we be applying that average number judgment to this options program or not?
So as Jason observed, we have option programs at ISB, BASE, ACMA, and they come way more than 5 miles. So that's a question you're going to have to struggle with through the working maps is, what are transportation, what is appropriate for transportation. Okay, so we're going to move, okay.
Sorry, on the point, and again, it ties into the other thing of the difficulty of the situation, but the point about, it looks weird to drive by one school. I'm going to challenge our ability to not have to violate that somewhere along this. And again, as I looked at the transportation numbers, moving, say, a Springville down to Timberland as opposed to Five Oaks was negligible in terms of the distance, in terms of the commute time. Distance being, you make that move, you solve two objectives directly. If you push that big population down to Five Oaks, now you've got one of those 50 or more % turnovers at Five Oaks that we've got to do there, and then another one at the next school down below to compensate. And you end up affecting 3, 4, 5 kids to achieve an objective rather than one.
So just, Steve, just very quickly, I hear you, Jason. I think there might be instances where we have someone close to a school, like the family conversation we've had a lot, but we have, in this map, 5, all of Bonnie Slope, all of Terralinda, all of Cedar Mill, or most of Cedar Mill, Springville, all driving past the middle school to get to the middle school that it shows. So I agree that there will be tough choices. It's too much in this one for me.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to move on to maps 7 and 8. So, Abhijit, do you want to stand in point, or do you want to sit at the table?
I was not planning to stand, but looks like that's the trend, so I'll do that. No, I don't think I'll need a pointer. So for every map, you have to start with the question of why. I started the map 7 with staff utilization of capacity map, simply because the middle school to high school's feeder split, that's like the gold standard. It's very difficult to beat. And then I removed the Sato split. So my idea was, if I can get to this middle school to high school feeder pattern and limit the elementary to middle school splits, can we get to that and still manage the numbers? So started with utilization of capacity map, removed the Sato split, and then I built on Mike's idea from last week, where if you remember, his main challenge in test map 1 was stolen numbers in 2025 were worse than today. And he was recommending feeding some part of Springville, that it's south of Springville Road, out of Stoller. So that's what this achieves by feeding that into Five Oaks. And no other change, and the numbers look good. The Stoller at 83%, my thinking is that's not too bad considering the percentage of legacy students that will get added. There are enough tools to think about what we can do with 108%. The reason I was comfortable with this because when we looked at utilization of capacity, even Steve's team couldn't get below 105 for some of the schools. And this is about 70 students less than what we have today. So 2025 projections are not worse than what they are today. So I went with that. And the test map 8 is a variation of this, where what I tried to do was the Rock Creek part that was split between Meadow and Five Oaks. I tried to keep that whole and feed that into Five Oaks, and we achieved similar results. Now in doing that, Rachel Carson got, it now feeds into Cedar Park. So between test map and test map 8, there are enough tools for us to optimize further, but like I said, the question to why was start with this feeder, try to see if we can reduce elementary to middle school feeder splits and still get 2025 numbers to the target we want. And that's it.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on, you've heard Abhijit's explanation and of his map. What say you? And Mike, you're scribbling madly, so I'm going to come back to you. So, Charisse.
I think this is another really good place to start. This one, 7, 10, potentially 11. 11's a very different look, but what I like about this one, I'd like to see some changes are within that Five Oaks boundary. When we look at the lower part of what's going to Five Oaks, we have a pretty big split going to high school. So I'd love to see what that looks like going into Mountain View and what that does to Mountain View's numbers, especially in 2025. And if we need to balance Five Oaks, pulling a little bit more of Springville down into Five Oaks, where we're already splitting Springville on that map. This boundary, this high school boundary with the elementary boundaries in Five Oaks between, I don't even know which schools they are. It's such a mess right here. Like, can we fix these two little pockets? Would these be nips and tucks that we could do to align them more to the high school feeder patterns? Do you know where, do you see what I'm
so
saying?
you're saying the rest of Beaver Acres to Mountain View, and there's a, actually let me point.
Yes, that
So
area
this
right
point
there.
right here is the rest of Beaver Acres. That
What is
is
that?
El Monica, and that would split El Monica. So that would be a concern there. And then this little thumb is McKinley.
So I guess the question is there an ability to nip and tuck either the elementary patterns there or the high school feeder there, where it looks like it's going like this? Can we flip any of it to make it match up?
So that would be a Herculean effort and not one we're going to deal with for high school. During the high school boundary decision, this boundary was worked on very, very hard. And, you know, going back and touching that is not going to, it's not something we're going to take on as a part of this process.
Do you know what the rationale was behind splitting those elementary schools? Especially knowing the middle schools
So
right there.
in this map right here?
No, in the high school boundary decision making.
So in the high school recommendation, the Aloha boundary went up to Highway 26 in this area right here. After the committee finished its work, there was a lot of, call it concern from neighbors or community owners, community members in that area. And the board, well actually, strike that, the superintendent, the deputy superintendents held public listening sessions about that recommendation and ultimately decided that given the proximity of this area south of Walker Road to Aloha, it would go to Aloha, and that this north of Walker would go to Westview. Okay. Monica.
So I also like this as a starting point, but I think building on Charisse's comments of kind of that Beaver Acre area, moving it down into Mountain View, if we were able to make some adjustments to that part, we could then also fold Bethany out of Meadow Park into Five Oaks and put Barnes back into Meadow Park. Now what that does is it leaves Cedar Park pretty underutilized, but and the only thing that seems to make sense is pulling some from Highland, which is already at 105. So I think there's a way to kind of rotate the outer schools to balance it out, keep Barnes with Meadow Park, and then reduce some of the splits to high school, because then Bethany stays with Five Oaks, and that reduces Meadow Park's feeders, and then Beaver Acres stays with Mountain View, and that reduces Mountain View's feeders. So it reduces some of the high school feeders as well.
Jason.
So of the two, they're quite similar, and so I would certainly favor 8 over 7, because I think introducing more splits were headed in the wrong direction. And then just a minor point, I almost didn't understand the point of the very small split of Springville, and just looking at the grid codes, it just didn't seem to be nearly enough students to justify it. And I haven't looked at the number of students in the grid codes there in Beaver Acres, but similar concern. Really my big concern here with both these maps, it's two, and it's around, the first one I'll talk about, what I'm going to call the Cedar Mill community, which, you know, if you look across West TV, Cedar Mill Elementary, Terra Linda, Bonnie Slope, this today comprises 75% of the Cedar Park community. It's where I live. I can tell you, when we talk about different ways to define community, I think I'm on season 13 or 14 of coaching either Milltown Soccer, Cedar Mill Little League, or YMCA basketball in this community. And because these schools are quite small, I mean, you really take 2.5 of Terra Linda, Cedar Mill, West EV, and you maybe get one Springville or one Sato. There's a lot, you end up having a lot of interrelationships between those kids. Going into middle school, that's obviously a great benefit. And you look at what this map does, it splits that community that's been together 3 different ways. To me, that's just, it's too much of an impact. I look at the desire to pull in Barnes, and it just clearly fails the proximity factor. I believe there is one empty grid code that is actually closer to Cedar Park than Meadow Park and Barnes. All of the others are either the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th closest school Cedar Park would be. It's distance, community, that idea just does not work for me.
So, Jason, I'm going to stop you there because we need to keep moving. Divya, I think you were next.
So the concern Sherry's raised about those thumbs near the Five Oaks, I think the same is happening with Jacob Ismer too. If you see, there's Jacob Ismer goes to Sunset as well as Westview. So there's a small pocket of kids, if you eliminate the Suma kids, because they'll go to Timberland anyway. So that's only 200 kids from Jacob Ismer feeding into Stoller, and then they'll go to Sunset without any familiar faces. That's problem 1. Problem 2 is Barnes, she talked about it. And also I want to mention that the walkability for Findlay kids, this is the only school that is losing its proximity to the neighborhood school. Every other child in BSD get to walk if they're in walking distance.
Okay. Michelle.
I do think that 7 and 8 are a really good place to start, and I think at least with 7, with the Stoller capacity being a little bit low, you could pull some of the kids from Timberland that are in Findlay. If that's really important that those kids walk to Stoller, you have the flexibility to do that. As far as Barnes going to Cedar Park, I actually am in favor of that, because it sounds like there is potential to move the dual language program with Barnes, wherever it goes, if Barnes stays intact. If I understood what Mr. Schreckmeyer said, that the dual language program could go with it. And also because Barnes would introduce a third high school feed into Meadow Park. And what I'm reading from the public comments is that Meadow Park is particularly torn apart with the high school feeds.
Okay. Christy?
I agree with Michelle. I have a lot of the same, I feel very similar for maps 7 and 8. A few comments. There are several schools that appear to be under the threshold of the minimum required students. These possibly include, for test 7, community test map 7, that's Cedar Park, Meadow Park, Mountain View, and Whitford in the 2025 year. And then moving Rachel Carson in test map 8, that brings Cedar Park up. So one of the things that I am concerned about with all of the maps is that I feel that we are concentrating the growth at the northern end of the district into Stoller. So we're keeping both Springville and Sato, and the high growth areas in the northern part of the district stay in Stoller, and that is somewhat of a concern for me. I also concur about the walkability for Findlay, and would like to see that addressed.
Okay, so Marnie, Yasmin, you ready? Okay. All right. Mike or Jennifer? Ratika? Okay. Abhijit, anything else you want to say in closing?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So now we're going to move to, oh, Abdul, sorry, I didn't see you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a comment. I'm in agreement with Michelle as regards Middle Park. I think keeping the feeder system to a minimum of two high schools, I think that's very important for Middle Park. I guess the way I look at these maps, for us to solve this, one of the things we would have to do is take one of the middle schools south of 26 and make it a phantom middle school for the north. And I think that's something we're trying to do with Middle Park in test map 8, where we have 3 or 4 elementary schools actually feeding into that. So I'm in agreement with that we could actually move forward with test map 8, or probably stick to the variant we had from last time in the staff feeder map.
John?
Also, just I wanted to add support to these maps. I think these are the best 2 that we've seen so far, in particular 8. And just thinking, Steve, about your procedure that we'll do, these 2 are so similar, and I hope that we can not choose these 2 as the 2, that one of the 2 becomes our map of this approximation as we're going to the next round.
That's fair.
I'll just really quickly say that I feel very similar about the 7 and 8, having experienced what it's like to be in a middle school where you're going 3 different high schools. It sucks. So I would say that I do prefer the ones that have 1 or 2, and that's why I am drawn more to 7 and 8.
All right. Monica?
I still think we can keep Meadow Park at 2 high schools if we do that kind of reshuffling of the outer schools. I feel very strongly that, I still feel very strongly we could keep Meadow Park at 2 high schools if we do that shuffling that I recommended and move Bethany out.
Wait, no, Meadow Park is still 2 high schools, right?
It's 2 high schools now, and we're
So you want to do it 1?
No.
Sorry.
No. I'm saying to retain Barnes and Meadow Park connection, that would introduce 3 high schools. So that was what I was referring to.
Okay, sorry, just to clarify. So what she's saying is that it's going to move
Yeah, I think I need to visualize it.
So this area right here, this could go into Five Oaks. This area right here, this could go into Timberland, and then this could keep Barnes in Meadow Park. Removing this section.
Monica, why don't you stop and grab the microphone?
Can you hear me? So this part right here is the part that I'm talking about absorbing into here. That would remove one of the high schools. And then taking this area, moving it down into Timberland, that would also remove a high school split, right? Okay. And then taking Barnes and putting it back into Middle Park, and that would remove the dual language concern. The only thing that it does is it reduces this capacity pretty low. So the question is, since this is at 106, can we put some of this up in here?
Okay. So anybody else on maps 7 and 8? Okay, we're going to go to map 9, and Mr. Williams, you're not going to get the microphone. I'm glad you're laughing. That was a joke. It was weak. So map 9 here, this was the request of the committee to take a look at, and it too follows a more of a feeder pattern of elementary schools to middle schools. And you'll see that there are a number of changes here. So if you look at Meadow Park again, just to start someplace, it is kind of the amorphous blob that would be going to 3 different high schools, but it would be, the Barnes would be still within Meadow Park and deal with that. One of the issues here is Cedar Park being so low, and you think, okay, maybe if we added the current split to that, well, then it's also an impact to Whitford. So it also has VOS going to Highland Park, which would require lifting the dual language program out of Whitford and putting it in Highland. And it would also require moving the high school dual language out of Beaverton High School and putting it in Southridge. I believe Beaverton and Southridge both have it now, and they both have it now, so perhaps that isn't as dramatic of an impact. The other thing here is it does get Five Oaks at a decent size. It does have a little capacity issues in 2025 for Conestoga, but the main concern would be Stoller at 114% in 2025. It would achieve the goal or the objective in 2021. Mountain View would be high initially, but then would settle down to a good number. So that's a very high level, look at it. And I see Sharice has got her card up, so we'll start there.
And I don't know, it would be really cool if we could do some of this in real time, but looking at Meadow Park, the Five Oaks pieces that could potentially feed into Meadow Park, even though we don't want to necessarily split Oak Hills, would be that slice of Oak Hills that goes to, is that Westview? Yes. And then pulling El Monica down into Meadow Park so that they can actually go to Aloha High School with more people, right? Because the majority of the Five Oaks school is going to go to a different high school than that little bit. Same thing with the one to the left. And if we pull all of those down to Meadow Park, can then we then take some of either Springville or Sato into Five Oaks and uncrowd Stoller?
If I'm following what you said, Sharice, you're talking about this bit of El Monica going to Meadow Park, And if we're able to move that south, you're talking about this area up here as moving to Five Oaks?
Correct, not just that bit, but also the bit of Oak Hills and the other little bit. Is that also Marnica or is that McKinley on the left?
So
Yep,
this
that.
bit of Oak Hills would go to Meadow.
Yep, so that they're with more kids in high school that they know.
Gotcha. Okay. John?
Just briefly, and I apologize if you guys covered this last week when I was out of town, but I did want to just take a second to thank the community and for a map like this. So we received hundreds of comments, several attachments, several pieces of analyses. We read them all. I read them all for sure. And I just wanted to thank you, Jamie Williams, Tara Powers, Eric Samantel, and others who did an incredible amount of analysis to put this map together. It warms my heart to know that we have folks like this in the community who care this much to spend this much time. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Divya?
I guess I'll continue to harp on walkability, but that's okay. So the problem that Cherry's talked about, the right-hand side of Oak Hills, going to Sunset while the rest of them go to Westview. I think the same problem exists with Jacob Wismer that is feeding into Sunset. So if you're going to adjust Oak Hills to put them with familiar faces in high schools, I would do the same with Jacob Wismer too. But I know you don't want to touch high schools, so I just feel like if you're doing to Oak Hills, Jacob Wismer is also on the table. I also want to echo Christie's point, 2 growing schools intact into Stoller is always going to put us in this 114%-ish situation. Do we want to have this conversation 5 years?
Yasmin?
Okay. So I suggested this map to be included in our discussion because I think there is some potential here. And this, to me, raised the question that we might have touched on before, the 2021 and the 2025. So the mandate of this committee, as far as I understand, is 2021. So if we meet our goals in 2021, I think we've done the job. But we can give recommendations for 2025 in addition to our map that we will arrive at. So because many of these maps meet the goals in 2021 but do not meet it in 2025, and other maps work in 2025 very well but do not work now. So this is, I don't know, should we discuss this once again? Do we have to achieve the goal in 2025? I understand it's a lot for the community to tell them, no, we'll sit again, we'll talk again in 2025, but things will change also. So that's one point that I would like to raise. Yeah, I wanted to say, I'm not sure the dual language programs will work very well in this map, or will they have some problems as well? So yeah, that's what I have on this one.
Thank you. All right. I think, Jason, you were next.
I wanted to echo everything John said. Having all the work that Jamie and the community is putting on this, also a lot of the very thoughtful engagement from many people in the community is, I'll just mention a couple of targeted things that jump out at me looking at it. Again, like the previous maps we're discussing, I'm seeing a 3-way split of what I'm calling the Cedar Mill community that's a concern to me. Beaver Acres hanging out over there also seems like a split of community that's not ideal. More than that, what I would say is I personally don't feel empowered to make the level of change that's indicated in this map. I think I quickly counted 6 elementary schools that were completely reassigned outside of those that had anything to do with Stoller and Timberland. I think there's a lot to be said for stepping back and taking a longer term look. My recommendation is if the district were to do that, we would be doing it over a longer period of time that we have here. We should be doing elementary, middle, and high school all together, and we should phase them in over a period of 10, 15 years. I think to have this level of change in a year and a half's time frame is too much. It's not in our objectives.
Pratika.
While I do agree with Yasmin about we need to meet the goal for 2021, I think that the change between 88% of capacity in 2021 and 114% in 2025 is a pretty significant jump, especially in 4 years, and I think that indicates a problem. Not to mention that the population of Cedar Park with this proposed boundary is 581 students, and I think we need a minimum of 800 students for it to be like a functioning middle school. So I don't really think that, I agree that this map is a really good place to start off of, but we cannot actually introduce it or propose it to the superintendent with Cedar Park having 581 students. Also with the shifts, I also agree with the shifts of Oak Hills into Meadow, and then the El Monica, getting rid of that split and moving it to Meadows. I think keeping schools together is super important, and I also agree with Divya about making sure that Jacob Wismer is afforded the same rules that Oak Hills has in terms of keeping that school together.
Okay, so next is Abhijit.
So one quick comment to address Yasmin's feedback. So this map is exactly same as Mike's as far as Stoller goes, and I would assume as far as 2025 goes, Stoller's number should be at least less than what it is today. So Stoller without Suma today is I think 1225, and that was the reason to feed what he was suggesting last time also, south of Springville, out of Stoller, south of Springville Road. So few grid codes, right? So I agree with committee members' comments here that the 2025 target has not been made very objective, and my rule of thumb was 21 students in one classroom. It's 3 grade for middle school, so maybe 4-ish more classrooms is okay, but I agree that's subjective.
So I did forget to mention that in map 9, Rachel Carson has been moved to Cedar Park, and Suma is at Timberland and not at Stoller. So to Abhijit's point, the Stoller population in 2025 is estimated to be a little over 1,200, which is about 300 less than what's there today.
No, Stoller without Suma today is at 1225, and this is actually worse than that. I mean, granted, 5-6 kids.
6 kids, yeah. Okay, Monica.
Similar concerns about the Cedar Park projected student populations being at 581, as well as Whitford drops to 672. So we do want to maintain a healthy student body at those schools. So we'd need to make some pretty changes on that side. Ideally, both could stay with Whitford, and that would relieve some of the capacity in Highland Park, which is above 100%. But it's also a pretty big school, so you'd have to probably take a little bit out of the top of Whitford or something to balance it out. But those 2 schools seem too low to stay with.
Okay, thank you. Charisse.
I agree with that. I think those going to Whitford makes sense, and I think that little bit into Cedar Park could be, I believe it's the bottom of William Walker, which is currently split. That could go back into Cedar Park on this map. And then if we are going to move those out, it might be even moving Cooper Mountain back in to Highland Park so that they're staying in the same high school pattern. Whether or not that gives enough growth for Mountain View for what's coming in the southwest corner of Beaverton, we probably need to look at that. But as far as looking at the large changes in this map, I think that's something that we as a committee actually do need to be very open to, because that's what we've been tasked to do. So just wanted to put those 2 cents out there.
Okay, Matt, I saw you kind of reaching for your card, but
I was just going to add to Monica's good comment about Whitford staying so low. We will not see. I don't think we'll see growth in that area at all. So I think it's important we keep that around 90 for the future.
Short of the golf courses being no longer golf courses and being redeveloped, well, I don't know, but I got plans. Michelle.
Like Divya is focused on walkability, I'm focused on feeders, and I think this just has way too many high school splits.
Okay. All right. Monica, I presume you haven't raised your card again. Okay.
I was
Marnie.
going to say I second what Michelle said too. That's way too many.
Okay. Abdul.
I just wanted to suggest that for next meeting, probably we should have that conversation, walkability or proximity versus feeder.
You're jumping ahead. Yes, we are definitely having that conversation. Okay, Christy.
I just wanted to echo what John had said about thanking the community for creating this map. I think that this map really helped us see that this map to me was the no split feeder at the elementary level that I think we kind of needed to see. And I think for me, it really emphasized that split feeders at the high school are possibly more of an issue than split feeders at the elementary school.
Okay. Charisse, you're going to have the final word on this one.
I would like to see this again, though, with some of the changes that we've been talking about, with fixing especially some of the middle school to high school feeders in Five Oaks and in Highland Park. So is that a possibility for the next meeting? Just making some adjustments to that.
If you are going to have a conversation at the end of the meeting and you want to move this map forward, we can certainly do that based on the conversations that we've heard here so far. You got another one? Okay.
So the first adjustments that were recommended over in the Five Oaks area, I think could work along with the ones in the southeast area, and kind of we could build off of that, I think.
Okay. All right, moving along. Marnie?
Sorry, really quick.
Okay, you're the third last person on this.
So ultimately, at the end of this meeting, I think our goal should be to have maybe 2 maps, 3 maps, so that we can send them to transportation.
Yep.
So we keep asking for more and look at different things, but please keep in mind, we really need to get down to whittle it down. So just keep that in your minds as we look at the last 2.
That's the reason why you're only going to get 2 votes. Okay, moving on. Map 11. So map 11, we were also trying to address, again, capacity and feeder patterns. But as Jason noted, and others have noted, there's no way to address Stoller without either limiting it to 2 feeder patterns, or to conversely then start introducing some splits. So what we have here, as you can see, is the major change that I think we'll all recognize is right up here in the southern half of the Sato attendance area that got the name Pirate Park during the Sato boundary creation, would be moved down to Meadow Park. And the southern peninsula here of Jacob Wismer would be split off from Stoller and moved to Timberland. This does not take into consideration the numerous comments that we have received about walkability. So, recognizing that there are issues with this map as there are issues with every single map that we've talked about, which leads me to reiterate that as we move forward, it is refinement based on those factors that are in policy JC. And one of the other things is we removed the split here for Raleigh Park between Oak Hills and Whitford, sending it all to Whitford. One of the issues that was identified in, I believe it was map 9, where we had all of McKay go to Whitford, we elected to keep the split right here at Highway 217 for, it's a split, but it was proximity based for that. We recognize that in Conestoga's stake, we have 106% in 2021, and we projected increase by 1 student in 2025. So we don't see the release or the relief coming that we do see in other schools. The concern we have about Stoller, while it does take a big bite out of Stoller in 2021, it creeps back up to 106% in 2025, and that is a little over 1,148 students. So it's better than today, but it still also assumes moving some of those students, so it'd be the Findlay students and some of the Wismer students out of the SUMA in Stoller to the SUMA, via SUMA at Timberland. So it also, you'll see that there's a part of Beaver Acres that's split, that is a legacy, if I could use that word, from the capacity map that we saw last time. I believe that was on maps 7 and 8 as well. So I will stop talking about that and open it up for questions. All right, Divya, kick us off.
The exact same point I've said. I'll repeat. Jacob Wismer, the small pocket of kids after the split, will be going to a high school without any familiar faces. Yes, I'm a Jacob Wismer parent.
Okay. All right, Jason.
Yeah, so similar to some of the things I've said about other maps, but collected this one. Again, we've now got a 4-way Stoller split. That just seems like too many pieces to break it into. I'm not a fan of splits. I don't think they're in the best interest of students. Of course, we have to live with them sometimes, but this feels like introducing splits for the sake of making numbers work on the map. We've got not enough kids being shifted out of Stoller into Timberland, in my opinion. And again, a very large disruption to the core of the Cedar Park community. To finish, some thoughts about the notion of pulling barns into Cedar Park. So it's appeared on a number of maps. And I pointed out, I mean, it's a real problem in terms of proximity, in terms of any sort of neighborhood unity. Yeah, I understand it's well-intentioned. We've heard feedback that it's not ideal to have the 3-way split into high school. But I think we've done our due diligence and seen, okay, is there a reasonable way to solve it at the middle school level? And I don't believe there is. I'm going to remind people of the history here. To my way of thinking, and Robert and Steve, you can correct me, when I looked at this earlier, I see at Meadow Park, maybe 60, maybe 2/3 of the total population is destined for Westview. The other third is kind of split Beaverton and Sunset. Maybe Sunset a little bit less than Beaverton. It's not big enough difference to argue about. The Sunset population was deliberately introduced 4 years ago as part of the high school boundary process. We've heard some very impassioned testimony about the problem of that the Oak Hills kids are experiencing and a way to solve it that would balance the kids at the north end of Jacob Wismer that's been cited a couple of times. That exact same testimony we heard was provided to the superintendent and to the board. The superintendent chose not to change the recommendation of that advisory committee, and the board approved voted to approve that split. Meadow Park, for the sake of walkability, those neighborhoods just south of 26 that are part of Barnes were kept into Sunset rather than joining the rest of Barnes at Beaverton. I can assure you a number of community members pointed out that may not be the best application of policy JC across the breadth of the district. Nevertheless, the superintendent chose not to change that. The board approved it, and that's just as recent as 4 years ago. I think it's fine for us to call out this as an issue, but I don't see it as a mess we can reasonably clean up. I think if we see it as a problem, we should note it in our recommendation to the superintendent that he should look at it about possibly changing high school boundaries. That's the most efficient way to solve that problem, in my opinion.
Okay. Anybody else want to talk about this map? Anybody? Okay. I'm going to start calling on people. Abhijit, any thoughts to share?
No, I think the clarification to Jason, I think he's right. We don't have in our discretion to change anything about high school. We can adjust some of the elementaries. I understand that, and I agree. Some problems are not out in our jurisdiction. Yeah.
Okay. Michael, you've been silent all evening. You're going to have to belly up to the bar here. You got to show that you're still alive.
Yes, indeed, I'm still alive. I guess I would just comment on this walkability issue. I think walkability, for me, it's a luxury. It's not a policy JC. It says neighborhood proximity. I understand you can put walkability underneath that, but that in no ways, for myself, is subordinate to student capacity, long bus rides. So that's where I stand. With respect to maps, I expect to support this evening. I think it's map 7 and 8. If I have to split those, maybe we'll talk some more, but that's all I have.
Okay. Jennifer, you too.
I kind of waited to talk because I wanted to hear everybody's opinions on all the maps and kind of just take it all in. For me, walkability, I mean, it is nice to be able to walk to school, but we do live in Portland. How many people actually walk in the rain? I mean, that's something to consider. I know walkability is nice. My kids walk to school.
Hey, no, we're not doing it.
So I do understand people's preference to be able to walk to school when they can. Right. That is very nice. As far as the maps, I think for me, going forward, I'd like to see 8 and work more on 8. It just seems like one that we can play with a little bit more than some of the others.
Okay. All right. So I'm looking for any final comments before we start the public testimony. Patrician.
I agree with Divya. Walkability to me is very important, and going forward, I would like to see map 8.
Okay. All right. We will get to selecting maps here after public testimony and final committee discussion. So, anything else before we go to public testimony? Yasmin.
I just want to raise one point. In the comments made by the public, there was somebody referred to the issue of programs for children with disabilities. If there is anything that we should know or take into consideration during this process about these programs, where they are, what should we bear in mind, I think please help us out, because I don't have any background about that, and the comment just mentioned them. So And the public, of course, if they want to enlighten us or just tell us there's something here, please take care. Please do go ahead. Thank you.
So, Mr. Schreckmeyer, do you want to answer that now, or do you want to come back with Ms. Hudson? It's working now.
I apologize for that. The students in a neighborhood school that have special ed needs that can be met with the resource room or the local team, you don't really need to worry about that because the district would shift resources to support those students in their neighborhood school. Other district-wide supports for students that have more profound needs, that is something that from time to time our special education department looks at vacant capacity in a neighborhood school and moves programs to concentrate students that have needs in common. And so those sort of variables are ones that the district would take on after your recommendation.
Sorry, I would also add that it is far less of an issue at the middle and high school because we replicate many of those programs across all of our schools. Far more of an issue at the elementary level where we may have only 3 programs in 34 schools. We replicate many of those same programs across all 8 and eventually 9 middle.
Hi, I'm Craig Beaver. I'm the administrator for transportation. I just have 1 or 2 things for you to consider when you're in making your decisions coming up. What you're calling walkability, it does matter. Because we have state law says anybody who lives within 1.5 miles of the school is not eligible for transportation, so they walk to school. If you take walkability out and just throw it down and not look at it, now you've considerably increased our costs for transportation, considerably increased our need for resources, and we nationwide, statewide, and region-wide, there's a severe shortage of bus drivers. It's a tremendous issue. I've lost, through today, I've lost 24 bus drivers, and I've hired 27. And we continue to interview and hire every single week. It's a tremendous thing. So I would encourage you to look at walkability, because if you don't, then we're adding a significant number of bus routes that we very hard pressed to meet that demand. So it is very important.
A couple other factors I want to add to that. So just in full transparency, we as a school district receive 70% of transportation costs reimbursed to the district by the state. Don't be comforted by that number. It's a large sum of money that comes back to us, but that other 30% we have to fund. So we currently fund about $18 million out of our general fund for transportation. So if in fact the walkability factor decreases, we increase more busing needs. The difficulty in that is it's the same pot of money. We need more buses and more routes. We have fewer teachers to serve students. Same pot of money. We don't have a separate transportation pot. It's a general fund budget, okay? So I don't need an applause. I'm just stating the facts, and I want the committee to have that awareness, but also the community, because people get comforted by that 70%. Oh yeah, you get that reimbursed. $18 million is still real money that comes out of the general fund that comes out of classrooms, ultimately.
Who decides which roads are uncrossable?
We use the transportation department, but we use national, state guidelines. We have guidelines, and basically for elementary, for middle school, give you an idea. So for no assistance for middle schoolers, it's based on the size of the road, the speed cars per minute, speed limit. So for middle schools with no assistance, it's 3 lanes, 30 miles per hour, no more than 8 vehicles per minute, and 175 feet of visibility. So 3 lanes. Anything more than 3 lanes, we're very hesitant. We don't allow middle schoolers to cross unassisted. If it's a controlled intersection, it goes up to 35 miles per hour. So if it has a signal or a stop sign, the same limits, it just raises up to 35 miles per hour. If we have a crossing guard there, it goes up to 5 lanes, 35 miles per hour. That's it. So, and crossing guards, again, crossing guards is a real thing. It costs money. It's not a position that there's not enough work for a full-time position for it. So it's very difficult to staff that. So it's something to take into consideration. Major streets, like the Farmingtons, the TV highways, places like that, Cornell, Barnes, we're not going to cross those with middle school age kids. So I hope that answers your question.
All right. We do have to get going for public testimony, and so I would ask Divya and Jason to hold on to their transportation question, and we'll come back to that. So I've got a bunch of cards here, and like we've done in the past, as I call your name, please come up to the seats that are reserved for our public speakers. We have, let's see here, Taylor Vaughn from Cedar Mill. We have Paul Baker. We have Sonia Cruz. We have Chuan Zhu of West TV. Kim Sanders of Oak Hills. Jyothi Vamuri. Kevin Lyons, John Ayers, I'm just going to say Raghu of Sato, and Pamela Broom of Rock Creek. John Ayers. Okay, so, yeah. Okay, so first up, Taylor Vaughn.
Is that right? Yeah. Just seeing some of the maps come out, I wanted to get involved, and I think a few of the questions that I had that I wanted to get a better understanding is the priority that was put on walkability. I think that's very important to our community. The other thing, I guess, leading around that I'd love to hear more about is the weighting or how things work with option programs versus the assigned geography, and again, I think that leads into the walkability piece. So that's what I was here for today, and I kind of wanted to advocate the importance of walkability.
Thank you. Okay, so before I call our next speaker, we're going to sort out our 2 minutes, right? 2. Okay. Paul Baker.
Hello. Yeah, this meeting is very, I enjoyed everybody talking about it. I mean, last time it was just 3 people going back and forth, so this is very refreshing. So we finally get to...
Mr. Baker, can I hold you for... Oh, yeah. It's me. Okay, my fault.
Okay.
Proceed.
All right. So, I mean, a lot of great points. Like some of you said, the walkability is very, it's, you know, it's a luxury. It's just, you can't move walkability areas around here and there. And And then you got to look at Timberland, around that area, it's going to be walkables, right? So those people are going to be able, those kids are going to be able to walk to Timberland. So you're going to save money there. So you got to, you got to adjust for that. And I do definitely like the high school splits, only two high schools per middle school. So that was really, I think a lot of the committees agreed to that, or members. What else was there? But I think it was very good meeting. And the transportation, I don't know if you can really save money on that, 18 million. You're gonna have to spend money. It's not like you're gonna save every million. I think it's a public school and you need to spend the money, and it takes money to do it, to run a school system like this large. It's the third largest school system in Oregon. So I just don't think we need to start picking at what's walkable and what's not. I think we got some really great maps here. And I like the fact that, like, I think Abdul said, the middle school should be kind of close to each other, the boundaries.
All right, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, Sonia Hernandez Cruz of Whitford. Ms. Cruz. All right, we'll come back. We'll come back. Xuan Zhu.
Dear committee, thank you for the hard work. Firstly, I would like to point out that in the material, middle school walk to school areas, I think it's far from accurate. If the Stoller Middle School walk to school area meets the criteria of walk to school, then the Timberland Middle School walk to school area should be much bigger than what is plotted. It should include a certain part of West TV district. The December 19 theme map evolved to the test maps, except for the map 3. All the other maps excluded West TV students from Timberland. And except for map 3, all the others have quite a lot of deficiencies. Firstly, all the maps except for map 3 indicate high volume of cross US 26 traffic. In addition, the West TV students suffer not only the car cross US 26, but also cross OR 217 traffic. Secondly, map 6 and 9 still have overcrowded Stoller. And thirdly, the map 7, 10, 11 subdivided the elementary schools, which I thought this practice is not recommended. And test map 3 could be improved. For example, one can move the Nancy Rouse Elementary School District from Highland Park to Canastota to balance the two middle schools. So in summary, I suggest the committee select test map 3 or slightly improve map 3, and so that West TV students can enter Timberland. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Puente, do we have Ms. Cruz present? Okay, great.
Buenas noches. Yo estoy preocupada acerca del programa de dual inmersión o dual language, que si lo van a mover de voz a otra escuela, porque mi testimonio es de que a los niños sí les ayuda, y pues a los padres también.
Good night. My concern is about the double immersion program at FOS, and I'm worried if the students I'm going to be split to a non-double immersion school because I want them to go to Whitford because I know that they can help them there.
Great, thank you. Okay, next up is Kim Sanders.
Hi, I have 4 kids in the Beaverton School District. I have a freshman at Sunset, an 8th grader and a 6th grader at Meadow Park, and a 2nd grader at Oak Hills. I wanted to talk tonight about cleaning up the feeds to high school. Currently, my 2 children that go to Meadow Park, they will be split, well, my 8th grader right now, she'll be split next year into, Meadow Park splits into 3 different high schools, Sunset being the very low end of that split. My freshman, who is at Sunset this year, absolutely hates it. She knows it's a good school. We talk all the time about how great of a school it is. She says, Mom, I don't care if it was the worst school in the district, I would still want to be with my friends, you know? She's having a real rough time this year because, and just today, when I picked her up from school, she said, do you know what it feels like to walk down the halls every day and not recognize anybody? I mean, a very, very small number went from Meadow to Sunset. Honestly, I don't care what middle school my kids go to. I will be committed to helping out at whatever school they end up in. I have nothing but respect for what Principal Freeman has done with my children at Meadow. I just want to see, you know, a good majority of kids moving from middle school to high school together. A freshman girl who knows nobody pretty much is hard. And even that handful of kids that live in the Oak Hills area that should be going to Sunset, a number of them have found ways to go to Westview or have chosen to go to different schools. So even that small handful of kids, some of those kids that should be at Sunset for another face to be known aren't there, and it's hard. And I have an 8th grade girl who'll be another freshman next year. Same thing for her. And thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yothi, haven't seen you since the Sato days.
Nice to see you again, Steve. Thank you for the opportunity to represent Jacob Wismer. 2 very large and rapidly growing elementary schools. They cannot feed Stoller. 6 out of 8 maps today have Springville and Sato feeding to Stoller. Why do these maps keep coming back? The numbers just don't work. Today, we thank you for bringing Test Map 3 for consideration. Some key factors we'd like to highlight are Test Maps 6 through 11 put Stoller over permanent capacity in 2025. Test Map 3 brings into Stoller the growing Sato, a pretty flat Jacob Wismer, and somewhat declining Findlay, including Suma, and it brings it all into Stoller and has better utilization numbers for Stoller than any of the proposals on the table today. High school transitions are difficult. We just heard from Kim, and I really thank you for that testimony here. We're fully behind that. Test maps 5 through 9 and 11 show Jacob Wismer as the only Sunset feeding school from Stoller. Test map 3 and 10 offer a balanced high school representation at Stoller, be it Sunset, where they have Findlay and Jacob Wismer coexisting, or Westview, where they would have Sato and Jacob Wismer going together. About 45% of SUMA students live within the walking zone of Stoller. Moving SUMA to any other school will bring us unnecessarily increased transportation costs, as we just heard Mr. Beaver elucidate today, and that was great that he shined light upon it. And they're detrimental to the environment as well. Test maps 5 through 9 take out SUMA program out of Stoller completely, so we do not support those maps at all. Test map 3 preserves SUMA at Stoller. Test map 3 and its derivatives best incorporate walkability. Again, I thank the transportation representatives here doing a great job.
Jyoti, I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Thank you.
All right. All right, Kevin Lyons.
Hello, and
and thank you for your volunteerism and all that you guys are doing here to try to make this work. I know it's complicated. I'm representing a number of families that attend McKay Elementary and then go to Conestoga, the small slice under Conestoga. And we are collectively very concerned with the maps that are showing our community going to Whitford. These students should really be attending Conestoga, which is their neighborhood middle school. There's many reasons for this concern, but the ones that relate to your criteria are as follows. To do with neighborhood proximity and accessibility, Conestoga is our nearest middle school. It's less than a half a mile for some, up to a mile, and a little bit more than a mile for others. Some of us can actually see the school from our homes. It's an easy walk, and most don't have to cross Schultz Ferry. There's an underpass available and trails to get straight to school. Those that do have a crosswalk that's lighted to get across the street. It is walkable. Many students do it on a regular basis. Whitford, on the other side of things, is not near nor accessible to our students. It's untenable for our students to walk or bike. There is 217 in between our community and Whitford, and there is a very clear barrier there between our communities, and us going to Whitford really splits us from our local community. With regards to feeder patterns, we do know there's a challenge with the fact that we go to McKay and then go to Conestoga, but our families would prefer that. It is our local middle school, and just because our elementary sends us, has a proximity issue, does not mean that that needs to be continued through middle school. So for these reasons and many others, we implore you to consider our feedback and allow us to keep going to our community school. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up is John Ayers.
Hi, I wanted to also thank you guys for all this effort you guys are putting in. There's a lot of contentious topics to go through, so I really appreciate it. I wanted to echo a few of the points that have been coming up. I really appreciated the discussion on transportation. The walkability topic is important. I'll testify that we do walk. We do take advantage of that. If you look at the Stoller Walk area, it's a tremendous area to take advantage of. I've been in the school district for 22 years, been attending Stoller for 14 years, and I'm going to explain that in a minute, but there's a lot of history. I've seen teachers losing their jobs over these budget issues. This is a zero-sum game, right? We're not going to just add money and be able to come through with that. So this is, opportunity cost, or, ability to pay for this staff. So walkability is a big topic. I wanted to underscore the value in map 3 that's been repeated here several times, and I appreciated the statements that when you take the growth areas of Sato and Springville and you clump them into a single school, you're not seeing the steadiness that you're going to need to have. When you look, and I have to say that we need to be able to look forward. We can't say that it's 2021 and we're done. If you look at the values that these Stollers going up in that time frame, those 4 years, it's 25%. That's not just all at the end. We're going to figure it out and then we'll deal with it at that. That's 6-7% happening per year. That's a constant retooling, constant dealing with that problem every year. It's right in front of us right away, and I don't think anybody's going to want to go through all this process and then be right back at it again. So I wanted to really quickly plug into the concept of legacy. Somebody mentioned earlier sports teams. We are connected through, I coach the Jacob Wismer teams. We're part of the Finley community. We're all part of, in Sato, it's all part of the same group. We've been going there for 14 years, nonstop. I have 6 children. Number 6 is coming up through there. We've been graduated from every hall. We are integrated with that school. We're part of that community, and it's a legacy point.
We'll have to cut you off there. All right, thank you. Okay, Raghu. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
No problem, you did perfectly well. So thank you very much. Thank you for all the volunteering that you all are doing. I know it is a very unenviable task. Thank you so much. And I'm also glad to see that the conversation today has been a lot more civil than it has been in the weeks past. So thanks to the community also. There are 3 main things that I want to point out today. My home is in the Pirate Park neighborhood. My backyard is Pirate Park, and my kids go to Sato today. For us, walkability is not a luxury. It is something that I have been hoping that my kids can walk and bike. They love to bike, and I've been hoping that they can bike to Stoller along the Pirate Park Trail, along the Rock Creek Trail. They don't have to, cross. They don't have to go on any main road. They can cross the trail. They can cross Kaiser on the trail, and the trail leads straight to Stoller. So that has been a desire for me for a long time, and when I see a map that takes the south part of Sato out of that zone and puts it into Meadow Park, that is my biggest concern there. So I was a little disappointed that map 10 was being presented as a walkable option, because yes, it is walkable for Finley, but you take away the walkability for Sato kids. The second thing I want to point out is that we want our kids to do more exercise, to enjoy the nature, to enjoy outdoors. Taking walkability out means that they don't get that chance to socialize with their friends and form like a school train, like a walk train or a bike train and so on. So that is really important for the kids. The last point is that I do want to get a shout out to my neighbor, Suresh. He has emailed you, Steve. He has written this nice fancy dandy program which takes optimization. You can put in whatever variables you want into it. It's open to everybody. You can go to the website and you can use that tool to optimize for driving distance, for location and so on. That's a tool that I can use for future boundary adjustments also.
Okay, thank you. We'll have to end it right there. Pamela is next.
Hello, my name is Pamela Brim, and I am a parent for Rock Creek students. A few things about the maps that were presented today that become concerning for Rock Creek. I don't think Rock Creek's brought up very frequently in these conversations. We're kind of on the outside of the district there on the west edge, and most of these maps, a couple of them have Rock Creek being split. We're a fairly small school, and seeing those splits is pretty concerning up in the West Union area there, to remove a small portion of the kids. And then on top of that, sending them as the only school really in this community down south to Five Oaks is pretty concerning for us. There is really no community crossover across that 26 boundary line, which is concerning. I keep saying that word, but that's what it is. South of 26 there is where all of the shopping centers are, and Target and Streets of Tanasboro and all of that. There's no communities immediately south of 26 that interact with the Rock Creek community. So moving us alone to Five Oaks going south of 26 is alarming. Having us moving with a sister community to Five Oaks would be something that I would hope you guys would really look at, because again, that'd be a lump of kids that have no friends moving into Five Oaks. So no split feeding of Rock Creek, no going alone. Couple things, walkability has been brought up a lot, and I don't think that walkability for one school specific to Stoller should come at the cost of walkability across the school district. Aloha Huber is immediately next door to a middle school. They're going elsewhere. So I think there's a lot of things that would be cleaned up transportation-wise, and that it shouldn't be focused on just one school, even though Stoller and Timberland are where bulk of things are being discussed. The district as a whole needs to be addressed as well. Also that as far as map 9 goes, there was a second version of the map that does show high school feeder being reduced into less splits versus just elementary school. So there's two versions of that map, one showing elementaries being cleaned up and one showing high schools being cleaned up.
Ms. Brim, we'll have to end it right there. Thank you. Okay, that's it for the public testimony cards at this point. So now we're going to go to our final phase of our meeting here. And what I'd like to do is offer, an opportunity for final comments before I start asking you about what two maps you would like to forward. If we have 5 maps that we want to forward, we're going to narrow it down to 2 maps. We've got to make it so it's a manageable amount of material that we can then send through our various filters for the data. So, let's see here. Oh, we'll get there. Okay. Any final questions, comments from the committee? Divya.
I had a question for the transportation department. Is now a good time or should we wait for after?
Craig, are you able to answer a couple questions? Okay. I want to keep this to kind of like 5 minutes or less. We're already over on time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
The question is, except the two maps that was presented today, most of others is moving some type of option program to somewhere else, away from the homeschool. What are the implications of that in the transportation department?
That's a good question. We transport about 2,000 kids when you look at all the options. The bulk of those kids, the vast majority of those kids, we're talking middle school kids is what I'm talking about. The vast majority of those kids are going to the option high schools. But we have, depending what Meadow Park, Whitford, those kind of places, between 120 and 150 kids are going to those that we're transporting. You know, the impact really isn't the same. It's almost like what Mr. Struckmeyer was talking about. We'll put the resources where we need to go. If wherever the program is placed, wherever SUMA is placed, you know, we're going to meet that and pick those kids up. The problem comes when there are long distances. For example, a thing that comes to mind is Springville. You know, we have kids that live in Vose area and Shoals Heights area that go to Springville. So those kids are on the bus for 90 minutes. There's just no way around it. Very, very long routes. They're high cost routes. So, you know, we want to try and encourage, you know, placement into the closest school to limit that.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, moving right along. So I am going to start asking which maps you want to move forward, and I'll just keep track as we go along. Starting with Marnie, and we're going to work our way around. So Marnie, what do you say?
7 and 8 are mine, please.
So we agreed at 7 and 8 would be considered a single map because of the slight variations in there. Is there another map that you would say? Okay, we'll come back to you. You're going to have to choose between one of those two. All right, John.
8 and 9.
Okay, Yasmin.
8 and 9.
Divya.
3 and 10.
Abdul. 8. Do you have another one, or? Okay, 8. That's fine. Michelle.
8 and 10.
Leprisienne.
3 and 8.
Abhijit.
So you said 7 and 8 is the same, right?
7 and 8 is the same, yeah.
So 7 and 9, or 8 and 9, whichever.
Jason.
6 and 8.
Monica.
Can I say 8 and 9 with the adjustments that were discussed?
Yeah, that's understood.
Okay.
Matt.
8, 9.
Ratika.
3 and 8.
Christy.
8 and 9.
Mike.
7 and 9.
Sharice.
8 and 9.
And Jennifer.
8 and 9.
Okay. So looking at my notes here, it's a pretty clear indication that we have 8 and 9 as the favorites. So we are going to come back at the next meeting on January 30th, as you see up there, with 8 and 9 doing our analysis from a, the transportation point of view, the proximity, the demographics, poverty, all the different factors that we have in policy JC. These are not final maps. These are working maps, and you will take a look at what the data shows, and you may say, we've made a terrible mistake, we need to come up with another idea. That is okay. We will move forward, and you may find, and I'm saying this for the audience as well, you may find that 8 and 9 look great right now, but you may say, hey, we need to go back and revisit another one. That's okay too, but we need to go into our next phase where we have narrowed it down. We will have 2 maps up here. We will not have 8. Okay? So with that, we are going to be adjourned until January 30th, and I told you it would not snow today.